Hello everyone, this class we are going to learn about untouchability is worse than slavery. Generally guys, what do you mean by untouchability? Untouchability is a sin. Slavery is also considered to be the sinful act. So in this lesson what we are going to learn, we can able to learn from brainstorming to get idea about this lesson. Can you think of various forms of discrimination? Yeah, we have various forms of discrimination in our country. Gender discrimination, gender bias, and caste discrimination, which will operating the world. So these are considered to be the evil spirit of India, evil system of India, which we need to prohibit. Then, is caste discrimination prevalent in India? No. Have you come across any instance of untouchability? So if you able to find any untouchability in front of you, what kind of art you may able to look forward, and how it could be the worst form for the discriminating people, which we are going to learn from this lesson. So look at the author picture, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. We shall have brief introduction about author introduction. Dr. Bhimarao Ramji Ambedkar was born on 1891 and died on 1956. He is one of the tallest political leaders in mainstreams social political discourse of modern India. He was pioneer intellectual in study of caste and untouchability. He delved into such details that, with all their possible and convincible dimensions, he brought caste discrimination at all given levels: social, political, economical, and educational. His seminal work, Annihilation of Caste, is both an illuminative as well as redemptive text. Ambedkar used his writing and lectures to confront a world of indifference and betrayal in order to pursue his reformative agenda, only paralysed by Gandhiji. The prescribed text throws light upon how slavery is better than untouchability. So in this lesson we are going to learn about slavery is much far better than untouchability, because the untouchability leads a sinful act towards the human being. So slavery, it must be admitted, is not a free social order, but can be untouchability be described as a free social order. The Hindus who came forward to defend untouchability no doubt claimed that it is. They, however, forgot that there are differences between untouchability and slavery, which makes untouchability a worse type of an unfree social order. Yeah, of course, we do agree that slavery is much better than untouchability, because the untouchability, the caste, which leads a person the worst type of unfree, that is, they will not able to get any freedom at the social order. The slavery was never obligatory, where untouchability is obligatory. A person is permitted to hold another as his slave. There is no compulsion on him if he does not want to. But an untouchability has no option. There is no option for untouchability. Once he is born an untouchable, he is subjected to all the disabilities of an untouchable. The laws of slavery permitted emancipation. The law of slavery permitted emancipation on slave. Always a slave was not the fate of the slave. In untouchability, there is no escape. Once an untouchable, always an untouchable. The other difference is that untouchability is an indirect and therefore the worst form of slavery. A deprivation of a man's freedom by an open and direct way is preferable form of enslavement. It makes slave conscious of his enslavement and to become conscious of slavery is the first and most important step in the battle of freedom. But if a man is deprived for liberty, indirectly he has no consciousness of his enslavement. So untouchable people will get away the freedom. So that is they consider the sinful act. So untouchability is an indirect form of slavery, is another form of slavery. To tell an untouchable, you are free, you are a citizen, you have all the rights of citizen, and to tighten the rope in such a way as to level him on opportunity to realize the ideal is a crucial reception. It is enslavement without making the untouchables consciousness of their enslavement. It is slavery, though it is untouchability. It is a real thought, it is a indirect. It is enduring because it is unconscious. Of the two orders, untouchability is beyond doubt the worst. Neither slavery nor untouchability is a free social order, but if a distinction is to be made, and there is no doubt that there is a distinction between the two, the test is whether education, virtue, happiness, culture, and wealth is possible within the slavery or within untouchability. Judged by the test, it is beyond controversy that slavery is 100 times better than untouchability. In slavery, there is room for education, virtue, happiness, culture, and wealth. So, according to Professor, what is untouchability could be called an initiation into higher culture. Neither the crushing of untouchability nor the refusal of personal growth was necessarily inherent in slavery. Especially, slavery was it is existed in a Roman Empire. It is therefore over hasty to say that slavery is better than untouchability, and the training, this initiation of culture was undoubtedly a great benefit to the slave. Equally, it is involved considerable cost to the master to train his slave, to initiate him into culture. There can be have been little supply of slaves educated or trained before enslavement. The alternative was to train those when young slaves in domestic work or in skilled craft was indented done to some extent before the empire by Cato the Elder. For example, the training was done by his owner and his existing staff. Indeed, the household of the rich contained special pedagogy for this purpose. Such training took many forms: industry, trade, arts, and letters. The reason why the master took so much trouble to train the slave and initiate him in a higher form of labor and culture was undoubtedly the motive of gain. A skilled slave as an item was more valuable than an unskilled slave. If sold, he would fetch better price. If hired out, he would bring in more wages. It was therefore an investment to the owner to train his slave. In an unfree social order such as slavery, the duty to maintain the slave in life and the body falls upon the master. The slave was relieved of all responsibility in respect of his food, his clothes, and his shelter. The entire of the master was bound to provide. This was, of course, no burden. No burden because the slave earned more than his keep, but a security for boarding and lodging is not always possible for every free man, as all wage earners now know to their cost. Work is not always available even to those who are already ready to toil, and to workman cannot escape the rule according to which he gets no bread if he find no work. This rule, no work, no bread, has no applicability to the slave. It is the duty of the master to find bread and also to find work. If the master fails to find work, the slave doesn't forfeit his right to bread. The ebbs and tides of business, the booms and depressions are victitudes or victimization through which all free wage earners have to go. But they do not afford the slave. They may afford the master, but the slave is free from them. He gets his bread, perhaps the same bread, but bread whether it is boom or whether it is depression. In an unfair social order such as slavery, the master is bound to take great care of health and well-being of the slave. The slave was property of the master, but this very disadvantages gave the slave an advantages over the free man. Being property and therefore valuable, the master for sheer self-interest took great care of health and well-being of the slave. In Roman, the slaves were never employed on Marshai and Maralial land. On such a land only free men were employed. Cato advises Roman farmers never to employ slaves on Marshai and Maryland land. This seems strange, but a little examination will show that this was quite natural. A slave was valuable property, and such as prudent man who knows his interest will not expose his valuable profession to the ravages of malaria. The same care need not be taken in the case of free man because he is not valuable property. This consideration result into great advantages of the slave. He was cared for so as no one was. Untouchability has none of the three advantages of the unfree social order mentioned above. The untouchable has no entry in higher orts of civilization and no way open a life of culture. He must only sweep. He must do nothing else. Untouchability carries no security as to livelihood. None from the Hindus is responsible for the feeding, housing, and clothing of the untouchable. The health of the untouchable is care of nobody. Indeed, death of untouchable is regarded as a good riddance. It's considered the good riddance. There is Hindu proverb which says the untouchable is a death and fear of pollution has vanished. On the other hand, untouchability has all the disadvantages of all free social order. In a free social order, the responsibility for survival in struggle for existence lies on the individual. This responsibility is one of the greatest disadvantages of free social order. Shortly, in this competition with the scales away waiting against him by the reasons of social stigma, he is the last to employed and to first to fired. Untouchability is a cruelty as compared to slavery because it is throws upon the untouchable the responsibility for maintaining himself without opening to him fully all the ways of earning a living. To sum up, the untouchables, unlike the slave, are vowed by the Hindus for purposes which further their interests and are disowned by them. When owning them places them under burden, the untouchable can claim none of the advantages of all an unfree social order and are left to bear all the disadvantages of free social order.